The American Revolution, it wasn't some single shot fired in the dark. Nope. It was more like a slow burn, a full decade of simmering tensions, of broken trust, and just this growing anger that finally boiled over. So let's dive in and see how 13 totally separate colonies went from being loyal subjects of the king to becoming united revolutionaries. And that's really the big question we're tackling today, isn't it? At what point does complaining about a new tax, turn into a full-blown fight for independence? We're going to trace the exact steps, domino by domino, that pushed the American colonists right down that very path.
So here's the game plan. We're going to walk through 5 key stages. It really is like a series of dominoes falling one after the other. We'll start with the messy, expensive aftermath of a war, see how that led to a bitter fight over taxes, watch as the resistance gets organized, and then we'll zero in on the one city where it all just exploded. And finally, we'll look at the one act that made war pretty much inevitable.
Now, our story starts in a place you might not expect, with a massive British victory. Yeah, the French and Indian War was this huge globe-spanning conflict, and when all the dust settled, the British Empire was bigger than ever, but it was also broke. I mean, deeply in debt. And you've got to try to see it from London's perspective for a second. To them, this made perfect sense. The war was fought, at least in part, to protect the American colonists from the French and their Native American allies. So now, with this huge new territory to manage and defend, it seemed only fair that the colonists, the ones who are benefiting from all this security, should, chip in and help pay the bills. Okay, so this is where it all starts to go sideways. The thing is, the colonists didn't necessarily have a problem with paying taxes in principle. What they had a huge problem with was how those taxes were being forced on them. And this brings us to the famous rallying cry of the entire revolution. Even before the new taxes really started rolling in, Britain started flexing its muscles. First came the Proclamation Act, which basically drew a line on the map and told colonists, you can't settle past these mountains. For people who dreamed of moving west, that was a huge blow. Then came the writs of assistance, which were these super broad search warrants. They let officials search anyone's home, anyone's ship, for any reason, without specific cause. For colonists who cherished their freedom and privacy, this felt a lot less like protection and a lot more like oppression. So here's the absolute heart of the matter. The colonists had 0 members in the British Parliament. Not one. Nobody was over there in London to speak for them, to vote on their behalf, or to defend their interests. And they truly believed that being taxed by a government where they had absolutely no voice was a violation of their basic rights as Englishmen, rights that they thought had been guaranteed for generations. And so you start to see this predictable cycle, this back and forth, take shape. Parliament would pass a new tax, like the Sugar Act on molasses, or the really hated Stamp Act on all paper goods. We're talking newspapers, legal documents, even playing cards. And in response, the colonies wouldn't just quietly pay up. Oh no. They'd protest, they'd organize boycotts, and they would make it crystal clear that this was not okay.
Now this quote tells you everything you need to know about Britain's mindset. Faced with all this colonial anger, they did eventually repeal the Stamp Act. But, and this is a huge but, on the very same day, they passed this thing, the Declaratory Act. It was a total power move. They were basically saying, all right, fine, we'll get rid of that one tax you hate so much, but don't you for a second forget who is in charge. We can and we will make any law we want for you anytime we want. For the colonists, that was an absolutely chilling message.
You can bet that got the colonists' attention. The Declaratory Act was a massive wake-up call. It proved to them this wasn't just about a single tax anymore. This was about who had the ultimate control. And their response started to become a whole lot more organized. So 2 major strategies really started to take shape. On one hand, you had groups like the Sons of Liberty. These were the guys organizing the street protests, and let's be honest, they weren't afraid to get their hands dirty and use intimidation. And then you had the non-importation associations. This was a more, let's say, economic approach. They organized these massive boycotts of British goods, and that was a powerful weapon. The goal was to hit British merchants right where it hurt the most, their wallets.
As the resistance grew, Britain decided to send in troops to keep order. And there was no place where the tension between the soldiers and the citizens was higher than in Boston, Massachusetts. The whole city just became a powder keg, just waiting for a spark.
I mean, just try to put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're already furious with the government, and now you're being legally forced to let its soldiers live in your town, maybe even in your own home, and you have to feed them? This Quartering Act created constant, daily friction. These soldiers, the redcoats, they weren't seen as protectors. They were seen as an occupying army, a constant walking reminder of Parliament's power over your life. And in Boston, that powder keg finally exploded. In 1770, a chaotic street brawl turned deadly in what became known as the Boston Massacre, where soldiers fired into a crowd of civilians. 3 years later, to protest attacks on tea, colonists disguised themselves, snuck onto British ships, and dumped an entire fortune's worth of tea right into the harbor, the famous Boston Tea Party. This wasn't just a protest anymore. This was a massive, direct, and destructive act of defiance, and Britain's response to this would change everything. Oh, you better believe King George III and Parliament were watching, and they were furious. The Boston Tea Party was the absolute final straw. Their response was swift and it was severe. They passed a series of laws aimed squarely at punishing Massachusetts, and these laws were so harsh that the colonists had their own name for them, the Intolerable Acts. And they were not messing around. This wasn't just another tax. This was a complete and total lockdown. Step 1. Cripple their entire economy by shutting down Boston's port. Nothing in, nothing out until every last drop of that tea was paid for. Step 2. Strip them of their political power by completely dissolving their elected government. And step 3, impose direct military rule over the entire colony. The goal here was pretty clear: make a brutal example of Massachusetts and crush this spirit of rebellion once and for all. But here's the incredible irony. It had the exact opposite effect. Britain's plan to make an example out of Massachusetts, it backfired. Big time. The other 12 colonies looked at what was happening in Boston and they felt this cold chill of dread. They thought, if Parliament can do that to them, they can do that to us in Philadelphia or Charleston or New York. Britain's attempt to isolate one rebellious colony ended up uniting all 13. They realized almost overnight that they had to stand together or they were definitely going to fall one by one. And so that brings us right back to where we started. After years of protests, of boycotts, of petitions, Britain hadn't just refused to listen. It had responded with overwhelming force, stripping away rights the colonists believed were sacred. They were standing at a crossroads, and they were facing one final, profound question. After everything that had happened, was war now the only path left?